The bells hadn't rung in years. When Thomas heard them toll at midnight, he realized he wasn't alone. Black Hollow was a ghost town, forgotten by time and left to rot under the weight of its own history. Once a thriving mining settlement, it had been abandoned for decades. No one remembered why, only that those who stayed too long never left. Thomas had come for answers. A paranormal investigator with a growing online following, he was no stranger to eerie places. Urban legends, haunted houses, old asylums. He had explored them all. But Black Hollow was different. It wasn't just empty. It felt waiting. He expected silence. Then the church bell rang. Thomas froze, heart hammering. He had passed the church earlier. It was in ruins. The bell tower had collapsed long ago, its heavy iron bell buried under rubble. And yet, the sound echoed through the empty streets. He turned toward the church. The doors, once rotted and broken, now stood tall. The windows, shattered during some forgotten storm, were intact. A candle flickered inside, his camera feed distorted. The town wasn't just abandoned, it was shifting. Thomas swallowed hard and approached the church. He had seen tricks of light before, felt the way an old building could breathe in the wind, how time itself could play illusions on the mind. But this was different. With each step, the cold deepened. The air thickened, pressing against his chest. His flashlight flickered, barely cutting through the shadows. Then, voices, low murmurs just on the edge of comprehension. Whispers curling through the air, slipping under the door. He reached for the handle. The wood was warm, almost alive beneath his fingers. Inside, the pews were full. Figures sat in the rows, their backs to him, unmoving, watching the pulpit where no one stood. And then, slowly they turned. Their faces were wrong, hollow, stretched, as if they had been screaming for centuries. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Then the bell tolled again, deafening, shaking the walls. And the congregation stood. Thomas stumbled back, heart pounding. The pews scraped against the floor as the figures stepped forward, hands outstretched. A whisper slithered into his mind. Join the sermon. The church doors slammed shut. Thomas tried to run, but his legs locked in place. He could feel something pulling at his mind, unraveling his thoughts. His vision blurred, the walls of the church stretching, pulsing like something alive. The figures in the pews loomed closer, their faces shifting, mimicking his own features. The bell rang again, and this time, the sound came from inside his own head. His knees buckled. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound burrowed deeper, rattling inside his skull. You belong here. The words weren't spoken. They were placed in his mind, each syllable burning into him like a brand. The figures reached out, fingertips brushing his arms, his face, his throat. Cold, dry hands like parchment and bone. And then, the world went dark. Days later, hikers found Thomas's equipment outside the ruins of Black Hollow. The church was collapsed, untouched for decades. The bell lay rusted in the dirt. But on clear nights, some still hear it toll. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the whispers of the congregation, waiting for another visitor. Some places should be left forgotten. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. But if you hear the bells toll, never go inside. The fields stretched for miles, endless rows of corn swaying in the autumn wind. But at night, something else moved between the stalks. Nathan had grown up around cornfields, helping his uncle run their old family farm. It was a lonely life, but peaceful, until the harvest season came. Every year, something happened in those fields. Cattle went missing, their remains found days later, stripped to the bone. Scarecrows were torn down, their wooden frames shattered. And always, the same warning was whispered by the elders in town. Never go into the fields after dark. Nathan never believed in old stories. Until he did. It started with the footprints. Long, deep tracks in the dirt, cutting between the rows of corn. Not human. Not animal. Something else. Nathan tried to dismiss it. Maybe just a drifter passing through. But when he followed the prints, they led to the center of the field, where the scarecrow should have been standing. It was gone. The next night, the dogs refused to go near the fields. They growled at the rows of corn, ears flat, tails tucked. Then Nathan heard it. A rustling, not from the wind, but from something moving with purpose. He shined his flashlight toward the noise. The stalks shifted unnaturally, parting as if something massive was passing through them. And then he saw it, a shape just beyond the rows. Tall, watching. Nathan ran. He didn't look back, but the field did not stay behind him. No matter which direction he turned, the rows stretched on forever, twisting, closing in. His breath hitched. His flashlight flickered. The air grew thick, damp, hungry. Then, a whisper in the dark. "You stayed too long." Cold fingers brushed the back of his neck. Nathan gasped and stumbled forward, but the ground beneath him wasn't dirt anymore. It was soft, shifting like something was breathing beneath the soil. The flashlight slipped from his grip. The bulb shattered. Darkness swallowed him whole. And in that void, something moved. He felt it before he saw it. A towering shadow looming over him, the sickly scent of rotting corn husks filling the air. A stitch-faced grin hovered just inches from his own, though the thing had no eyes. No eyes, but it was watching. Nathan tried to scream, but the whisper returned, this time inside his head. One must stay. His body locked up, muscles freezing in place as invisible hands gripped his arms, his legs. He felt himself being lifted, carried, not by something physical, but by the very field itself. The stalks bent and twisted, pulling him deeper, wrapping around him like roots reclaiming the earth. Days later, the farm was abandoned. The corn kept growing, and at the center of the field, a new scarecrow stood. It wore Nathan's clothes. Its grin stretched wide. Some places demand offerings. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, but never walk the fields at night. The attic had always been locked. When Daniel finally opened it, he wished he never had. Daniel inherited his grandfather's house, a sprawling, crumbling estate on the outskirts of town. The lawyer handed him the keys with a warning. Don't go into the attic. He laughed it off until the footsteps started. The house was ancient, the kind that groaned and sighed with age. Daniel dismissed the odd sounds at first, settling wood, scurrying mice. But these noises were different. At night, just as sleep took hold, a slow creaking echoed through the ceiling above his bed. A shuffle, deliberate and heavy, like someone shifting in their sleep, and always breathing, deep and ragged. His grandfather had lived here alone for decades, never mentioning anyone else. So who, or what, was making the noise? It wasn't just the footsteps. Strange things began happening around the house. Objects weren't where he had left them. His grandfather's old leather chair in the study faced the door every morning, though he swore he turned it back toward the fireplace each night. The kitchen radio crackled with static at odd hours, cutting through the silence with faint, warbled voices. One morning, he found the attic door unlocked. He hadn't touched it. The handle was ice cold when he reached for it. A deep shudder crawled through his spine, an unshakable sense that something was waiting on the other side. His sleep deteriorated. Dreams twisted into nightmares. Shadowed figures at the attic door, their hands pressing against the wood from the other side, whispering in a language just beyond his understanding. And then there was the smell. Something rotting, faint at first, but growing stronger each day, seeping from the ceiling vents. Finally, he decided he couldn't take it anymore. He had to see what was up there. With a crowbar in hand, he broke the rusted lock and pushed the attic door open. A gust of stale air rushed past him, thick with dust and something worse, something ancient. His flashlight flickered as he stepped inside. The attic was empty. No furniture, no store belongings, just a wooden chair in the center of the room, facing the trapdoor. And then he saw the imprint in the dust, a long, deep indentation in the floorboards, the shape of a body, curled up, as if something had been sleeping there for a long, long time, waiting. The trapdoor slammed shut behind him. The air thickened. A pressure settled on his chest, crushing, suffocating. The flashlight flickered again, the beam shaking in his trembling hand. Then movement. A long, skeletal hand curled around the back of the chair. A rasping breath filled the attic. "You woke me up." Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, twisting toward him. A figure began to rise from the imprint in the dust, tall, impossibly thin, its limbs unfolding like something not meant to move. Daniel turned to run, but the door would not budge. The house would not let him out. The figure took its first step forward. Days later, his friends arrived, expecting to find Daniel settled in. Instead, they found the house silent. The attic door was open. The chair remained in the center of the room. But now, there were two imprints in the dust, one fresh, shaped exactly like Daniel, curled into sleep. His friends never found him, but on still nights, neighbors swore they could hear something moving in the attic and breathing. Some things should never be disturbed. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, but never wake what sleeps above you. Some houses have secrets. When Anna moved into the old Victorian home, she thought the noises were just creaking wood. Then the whispers started. The house had stood for over a century, its history buried under layers of wallpaper and dust. Anna bought it cheap, eager to start fresh after her divorce. The real estate agent mentioned nothing about what had happened there before. The first few nights were uneventful. Then she noticed things moving, small, almost imperceptible shifts. A chair angled slightly differently. A book opened to a page she hadn't read. And then came the scratching inside the walls. At first, she assumed it was rats. Old houses had pests, but exterminators found nothing. No droppings, no holes, no sign of life. But she could hear it. And then, one night, she heard something worse. The whispering began at 3:12 a.m. A faint, rasping sound, like a breath just beneath her ear. "Let me out." Anna bolted upright, heart hammering. The room was empty. The next morning, she found long scratches on the inside of her bedroom door. She tried ignoring it. She tried rationalizing. Stress, exhaustion. Her mind playing tricks on her. Then her phone picked up the voice. She had left it recording overnight. When she played it back, the whisper came through the speaker clear as day. "I see you." Anna had enough. She tore at the old wallpaper, determined to uncover whatever secrets the house held. Beneath the layers, she found something that made her blood run cold. Carvings. Hundreds of them. Names scratched into the wood beneath the wallpaper. Some crossed out, some still waiting. And at the very bottom, newly etched into the wood, Anna. The lights flickered. The air thickened. The walls moved. Then she felt the breath on her neck. A hand, unseen, pressed against her shoulder. She spun, but no one was there. The whispers grew louder now, echoing through the walls, overlapping, pleading, demanding. "Let me out." The house trembled, the walls buckling as if something inside was trying to force its way through. The air smelled of damp earth, of rot, of something old and hungry. Anna grabbed her keys and bolted. She reached the front door, but it wouldn't open. No matter how hard she pulled, it wouldn't budge. The whispers became a chant, surrounding her, pressing in from all sides. Then, the final whisper, right at her ear, "One must stay." The house exhaled. The lights flickered once, then steadied. The air lightened. The whispers faded, and Anna was gone. The police found the house empty. Her car was still parked outside. Her phone lay on the floor, screen cracked, still recording. At the very end of the recording, a single whisper. One more name to cross off. Days later, the house went back on the market. And somewhere beneath the wallpaper, a new name was waiting. Some places don't want to let go. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. But if you hear whispering in the walls, never listen.